another assignment you're going to have where you're going to be sharing your culture, and you're going to be talking, and I'll go over that assignment this week, I believe, so later on this week. But you'll see here that this is an iceberg, okay? So icebergs, typically you just see a little bit of the iceberg that sits at the top of the water because they float. And so a little bit will sit at the top, but the rest of the iceberg, the majority of the iceberg, will be below the surface. So this kind of puts this concept of an iceberg and culture together. So for instance, the surface culture, which is like that tip of the iceberg that you have, that's what we see, what we can witness. But as you can tell, that is just a very, very small part of this whole iceberg. So what you see is just a little bit about what a culture is. And it's really all these other things under here that make us a culture. Okay? So some of the things in the surface culture are food, dress, music you listen to, the visual arts you participate in, the drama, crafts, dance, literature, language, celebration, games. Those are all part of your kind of surface culture, what you can see. And then the next level is your shallow culture, and this is the unspoken rules. Okay, that means nobody says them, but everybody's taught them, all right? And they have to do is, what is courtesy? You know, how do you have conversations? We're going to get into a lot of these more as the quarter goes. I'm just kind of giving an idea. Concept of time. For some people, time is very important and they're early everywhere, right? And some, what you're doing in the present moment is what's important. And so you're late a lot of times. Neither one of them's wrong. None of these are wrong. Personal space. Some people have unspoken rules about their personal space. I want elbows out. And I don't want anybody but like my husband or kids any closer. Okay? So you could read through the rest of these and kind of get an idea of how we could be different based on these concepts within here. We look in the deep culture. These are unconscious rules. These are rules we don't even realize that we have a lot of times. So this could be things related to preferences for competition or cooperation. Are you competitive? How are you supposed to tolerate physical pain? How do you view yourself? Is the past important or is the future important? Is one more important than the other? What is obscenity? Okay, obscene. What is obscene? What's disgusting in your culture may not be disgusting in another culture. Attitudes toward dependents or children. How children are treated. How elders are treated. How you solve problems, particularly based on how old you are, whether you're male or female, whether you're rich or poor, what you do, those kind of things. So I want you to think a little more about this iceberg of culture and maybe where you fall into these different areas of culture. What can you say? My culture has this, my culture has this. A lot of times people, especially people that are from the majority culture, which in America is white, middle to upper class is the majority culture. So middle through upper class. So you would think that between us, there's different cultures, right? But then even outside of the majority, you're going to see different aspects to their culture. So a lot of people are part of the majority culture, like I am. I'm part of the majority culture as a Caucasian person in the United States. We make up the majority. And so because I'm from that majority culture, I see it from a different perspective than someone else might that's not from the majority culture. So when I was taking a class similar to this, I didn't think I had, a culture. And I did. I have very strong culture, and I really realized that when I moved to the Northwest from the South, because when you compare those two different cultures, they're so different. But I didn't realize it because it was part of the majority. And so I just thought, well, I don't have anything special. I'm just like everybody else. But when you're part of the majority, that's what it is like. Yeah, especially if you only hang around people like you, then you're really not going to see any of those differences. One other thing I wanted to point out, and both of these handouts are in Canvas, okay, so you can pull them up. Another thing I want you to think about social positions, okay? There's this concept of social positions that depending on where you live, and we're going to be looking at the United States, okay? Because it's different in other places, but this is the United States. So um, when we're talking about social position, it's the idea that some of us have more of a advantage, or what we call an agent rank. Okay, they're more dominant, and they belong to the majority. Okay, so they tend, because they belong to the majority, they tend to have some advantage, and we'll be talking about it throughout the quarter. And then the other side is marginalized or target rank. And these folks are not dominant, and they're not in the majority. Okay, in the United States, they are not in the majority. So, because of that, they experience the world very differently. So, social group, you'll see at the top rank there. We start going through the different age, the different categories here. The first one is age. So adults 18 to 64, they're the dominant, and they have more privilege in our society. Well, non-working people aren't as respected in our society. Children, adolescents, and elders tend to be not dominant in our societies. You're always going to see exceptions, okay, always. But when you look overall at the full data, you will see that these groups are not dominant. We'll be talking about focusing on exceptions, focusing on that one exception that doesn't fit, because there's always going to be outliers and exceptions to things, but that doesn't negate the fact that there's a whole majority group of people, okay? We'll talk about that more. Appearance. So basically, there's very specific societal standards for beauty, and if you don't fit those, you would be non-typical over here. Disability, able person. So people that don't have visible disabilities are considered to have privilege, and those with disabilities are not dominant. Their world is not built for them, it's built for these able-bodied folks. Religion, religion, religion or spirituality is another way I like to put it, especially now, because what we're finding is that who is dominant now are cultural Christians who identify more with the culture than the actual belief of Christianity, agnostics, and atheists. And a lot of the cultural Christians won't attend religious services either. For instance, I'm Christian, but I don't believe in organized religion. I don't. Yeah, I just don't. I think that it's been used to hurt, kill, murder, people. So I just have a hard time with it. But I still have the belief of Christianity. My husband is agnostic, so he believes there's something out there, but he doesn't know what it is necessarily. And then we have atheists who does not believe that there's any higher power at all. So used to, it would be Christians that would be in the majority here, but now things are changing and beliefs are changing. The social norms of our society are changing. And so if Christians are not always in the majority anymore. And I see that a lot more often in like my classrooms, for example. I tend to see a lot more people that are, non-religious Christians and agnostics than they are Christians. So that is changing. It's kind of interesting to see that change. The majority right now, anyway, is white European Americans in our culture. It's not everywhere, but it is here. But it won't be for long, because in the next couple of decades, we expect people of color to be in the majority. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens when this switch occurs. It has in other countries, and depending on the country, depending on how they handled it. But we do know that last year more brown babies were born than white babies, which I think is cool. Employment and professional status. So, depending on what your job is, you get more respect. I think during the pandemic, we hear a lot about those frontline workers. Those people were disrespected until, the pandemic happened. Everybody was saying, oh, they just flip burgers. They shouldn't get a higher minimum wage. And now all of a sudden they're essential employees and heroes. So it's very interesting during the pandemic about how this changed a little bit as far as professional job titles and more of that service blue collar work. Education, formal education has been valued in the United States and still is compared to other countries. Social class. So, depending on whether you're in, if you're in poverty, if you're middle class, or if you're in upper class, it is different. The rules are different, the expectations are different, and definitely our system is built for these people and for people with education. If you think of just the bureaucratic processes we have within our government to get anything done, it's for these people, not for these people. Okay. Sexual orientation, heterosexuals are the majority still. And anybody that does not fall into that very strict gender role and sexuality roles of heterosexuals are in this other box over here. Indigenous background. So whether you're non-native or native, native folks are not valued by the majority. The majority are non-native. They used to be native. So this is a big change, but it's not valued. So indigenous knowledge is not valued as much as other types of knowledge. Indigenous peoples in our state have been talking about climate change for decades and decades. They've been talking about the depletion in the salmon runs for decades and decades. But those were not valued, their opinions weren't valued. Another one is national origin. So if you were born in the U.S. and you live in the U.S., then you have more privilege than someone that immigrated or is a refugee in a lot of different ways too, because the system's completely different, not just because there's a difference between maybe what you're eligible to receive and not receive. It's not really that as much as it is the idea that this is a whole new place with all new rules and expectations. All right, so I went through most of those there. You can read the rest too. And this is just for your own kind of knowledge to think about as we go along the quarter. So this will play out through the quarter here. But you can put on this page, you would look at the age, put your age, and you would put whether you are advantaged or if you're marginalized. They also call it agent or target. Okay. And so you can kind of go through and list all of yours here and then look at which groups you belong to, because most of us belong to multiple groups. That we, in some ways, we are part of a advantaged group, and then in some ways we are part of a marginalized group. I know I am. But it changes your perspective when you can kind of understand your advantages and when you have those, and when you can understand when you're at a disadvantage within our society. Okay, we'll be talking more and more about this throughout the quarter, but I want to kind of touch on it. All right. Thank you very much, guys.